Kia ora koutou katoa. I am Satyamitra Ashok, Executive Director at Social Enterprise Auckland, and it is my pleasure today to be here in the midst of an extraordinary time doing a special series for Social Enterprise Auckland. Social Enterprise Auckland is a collaborative project that builds momentum and connects social enterprises together, illuminates their stories, and amplifies investment opportunities. We are focused on building a culture where all businesses consider creating social benefit. In this new initiative, we are creating a series of discussions and conversations with people in different parts of the social enterprise ecosystem to tap their expertise, hear their stories, and look to learn from them. These discussions are not designed to be in-depth ones. They are meant to be relatively short conversations that leave the maximum impact. Today, we are joined by Richard Catherall, who has recently joined the Auckland Council as Social Innovation Specialist within the Community Empowerment Unit. Richard, my pleasure to welcome you to the series.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Before we kick into the meaty questions, let's start with a brief introduction from you on yourself, the work you've done, and what brings you to New Zealand.
Okay. Well, my interest in social enterprise began in the late 1990s while I was at university, which I think is not unlike many young change makers around the world, discovering an interest in solving complex problems during their studies. But at that time, I didn't know what social enterprise was. I know a thing or two now, I guess, having been active in social enterprise for about 20 years. In the last 15 years, I've been involved in approximately $80 million worth of business development related to innovation, enterprise and investment, both in urban and rural environments. Nearly 30 million of that has been really my passion, which has been to work in hard places, emerging markets, developing economies internationally, working with some of the most inspirational people that I've had the privilege to work with. This has taken me into 25 countries, developing a specialism in conflict zones, emerging economies, developing countries in transition. I see my entrepreneurial journey as practice, and it's included roles as a CEO of social enterprise, director of social enterprises. I spent a period as entrepreneur in residence for local government in the UK. I'm a coach and a mentor and advisor to social enterprise teams around the world. I've worked with investors and funders, delivered investment readiness work to secure some really exciting deals, fostered collaboration to enable mergers and more systemic ways of solving problems. I've designed programs for startups from scratch, which is a lot of what I've been doing the last few years internationally. I remain involved in an educational social enterprise I co-founded in Nigeria. I also have a deepening interest in financial inclusion for LGBT communities. My partner and I chose New Zealand to pursue our own personal growth opportunities that we couldn't explore in more fragile parts of the world. And I'm currently the Social Innovation Advisor for Auckland's Community Empowerment Unit.
Thank you, Richard. Especially great to have you here in New Zealand with that amount of expertise and coming and joining us here in the social enterprise front. Do you believe that New Zealand's social enterprises, as far as you've seen, are any different from any one of the other international social enterprises that you have had chance to meet and interact with? How and why, if at all?
Sure, I think of course they're different. I mean, the diversity of the sector stems from the diversity of communities and society across the world, which is why I've enjoyed working internationally so much. But I would say that they are similar and different. The similarities, I would say, are that the position of social enterprises in New Zealand is similar in terms of the contribution that they could make to the development of the country. I didn't really get that sense when I was in the UK or even in some parts of Europe, but there is a link between emerging economies, hard places, areas in transition, and social enterprises in New Zealand, perhaps because of the age of the country the size of it, just a sense of common purpose, really. And that's one of the reasons why I was attracted to New Zealand, because I want social enterprise to have the biggest impact it can. I also think that maybe there's a similar attitude to scale and what's appropriate in a sustainable model, and in the pushback that social entrepreneurs here push back against the models that would otherwise just make them ape the corporate sector or just deliver what investors want them to see. It's quite interesting because I've done a lot of work with investment readiness, and I was a proponent of organizations becoming investment ready. But as I've done deals and seen deals go well and bad, I've realized that the investors are probably not getting investor ready in terms of working with a new economic model. So I think that pushback against investors is valid, and that's something that you share in common with social entrepreneurs in Africa or in the Middle East, for example. I also think a major difference is between the two is either a focus on nudging systems to reduce inequalities. I think that's what people do here. We identify inequalities in our system and we try and nudge things to reduce those inequalities. Whereas internationally, I think we're nudging systems to be more inclusive. A subtle difference there, and it's debatable, but I think it is that there's enough difference to get more than a sheet of paper in there.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that. I'm going to ask a question that just popped into my head while you were describing those differences and common points. That is with regard to the pushback against investors. Now, you've explained how your thinking along those lines have changed over time, and what do you think that would likely evolve into, that pushback against investors, especially here in New Zealand?
I think there needs to be a shift in power, as there is across all of what social enterprise does. For me, it's all about shifting power. One of the criticisms I had of programs that were supporting young entrepreneurs, for example, is that it was almost commoditizing entrepreneurs. We weren't really investing in their vision and their development and their idea of the world and the meaning it had to them. We were sort of handpicking the best, the most excellent ideas because we wanted to showcase talent or potential, or it wasn't a meritocracy. It was something different, and I push back against that myself in terms of, are we being as user and customer centric, supporting entrepreneurs as entrepreneurs are when they're creating value for the people that they work for and with. And I think it's similar with the investors. I see that our job as social entrepreneurs and social enterprises is not just to create new financial products that investors can make money from. Our mission is not just to rescue their capital from where it's currently invested and give it a more sustainable purpose. We're looking for partners, and we're looking for a return to more genuine venture capital, really. And the investment is not just in our businesses and our business plans and our proposals, it's in the impact that we're trying to achieve, the society we're trying to build. And I feel that that's what the pushback needs to be about, is, what are we investing in here? If it's just about me, it's just about my business plan, then the focus is on, you've got to become investment ready, you've got to deliver me a financial return. Otherwise, why would I be, incentivized to work with you? Well, I think there is a bigger incentive in terms of the climate, a more inclusive and equal society. It's that we're investing in, and we're a means to an end, really. And I don't think that the investment community is at that mature state to be really clear about what they're investing in long term. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. What I got out of it was that there needs to be a systemic rethinking of priorities and rethinking of what return actually signifies. And while you were talking about investors as a group, I was thinking more about the purpose of Social Enterprise Auckland as a whole, where one of our focuses is to change the mindset among all businesses as a whole, to understand that social impact should be one of those measures that they should strive towards. What is your thinking along those lines? Do you think that the systemic change should go beyond just investors as a group and look at how we do business at all, and and overall within the system that we have as an economy?
Absolutely. I think one of the most challenging parts of my own practice of being so passionate about social enterprise is to put it into a bigger context and realize that if I was just advocating for social enterprise, I'd come up short. You know, I do think there's a genuine opportunity for us to reflect on the type of economy that we've developed and the societies that that enables, or in a way we can see now how society subsidizes these economic endeavors, and that's just not sustainable. So I do think that we're not talking about evolutionary change, we are talking about a paradigm shift, so no one is excluded from that. I think internationally, when you look at really wicked issues like slavery, no one social enterprise could scale to solve that problem. And you need to look at, for example, the scale of global supply chains to get anywhere near the capacity you need to solve that kind of problem. And that's a good example where I would say, you know, you're going to achieve that kind of change and impact through influencing businesses to, you know, change the way that they manage and develop their supply chains, because the way that it's been done has allowed slavery to come back, which is just an amazing, crazy situation. I think that we see now with the crisis that we're facing that, you know, the economy just got switched off. So it's fundamentally not sustainable if it can just be switched off. And if we're going to go forward with higher expectations about the level of resilience we've got, the level of flexibility we've got, it now is a great time to talk about very different ways of doing business with each other, and where the power lies in that structure. And you know, I think all bets are off now in terms of, you know, it's not just a simplistic, you know, advocating on behalf of one view or another. It's about all those different views coming around the table, and that diversity of opinion and background, you know, giving us some of the creative capacity we need to experiment with a new way forward. And I think that's what it links back to my previous point. You know, something that's in common between social enterprises in Auckland and in other countries is that they're building something more than just their business. And we are already quite isolated over here from the rest of the world. Our joint effort is about, you know, building Auckland, advancing Auckland into the future and what that looks like. The growth of our businesses is part of that, but the ultimate outcome is, you know, what city, what society, what community development are we really trying to achieve?
That leads me to another question. What do you think is the role of government, especially in New Zealand? And when I mean government, I'm talking about both central and local governments in bringing about that kind of change in the system, in the thinking and accounting for social impact. What is their role?
I think this is a really controversial question, and I've got to be careful. One, because I work for local government here. Two, because I come from a very different culture. I think this is one of the areas where New Zealand is very different from the UK and Europe. And, you know, I've worked with the UN, I've worked with, you know, African governments, Middle Eastern governments. So I've seen quite a diversity of how government happens. I think one of the things that definitely changed in international development is that what people label as the Washington Consensus, which came in after the war that ended in 1945, that consensus has been completely eroded now. And so a purely market-led approach to any development is now really questionable. And when you're looking at complex development in international development, for example, the role of government is now something that does have a real focus in terms of creating and shaping markets, intervening, greasing the wheels. So I suppose the safest thing for me to say is that in the future, government does have more of a role in making things happen. But the balance of that is that it should be doing it to make itself redundant, not in the same way in the past, as we said, the shrinking of the state, but that when the state intervenes, it intervenes to actually make something possible for something else to go forward, and then it intervenes in another area. So I feel that government, especially local and national in New Zealand, is much closer, so that they need to collaborate more, but then the government needs to become more of a collaborative partner that is the kind of custodian of what the community aspiration is, what city they're trying to build. And then it becomes that real enabler, removes roadblocks, uses its leverage, uses its purchasing power, for example. I mean, after the crisis, I think things like public procurement are going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So, as social entrepreneurs, as social enterprise practitioners, we need to make sure that we influence that real focus on public procurement to do heavy lifting in the direction that we would propose, so that it's not just for economic outcomes, that, it helps us accelerate towards some of our climate goals, some of our social goals. So, I think it's a really difficult position for government to be in because, one, it's being asked to do more. Two, the models that it's using are under threat. Just look at Auckland, look at, the ability of national governments to borrow. In some cases, they're not as powerful as big corporates, which is a weird position for them to be in. Three, they're not experts in this new role, so they do have to both lead and learn at the same time. And four, which is what we share with all of them, is that we do have to collaborate, big and small, not in hierarchies, because we do need that collaborative capacity to actually tackle the complex issues that we're facing. No one agency can do it all, and mistakes and friction will happen as a result. So I think, we're seeing a period where, everybody's role is being reviewed and they're having to both lead and learn at the same time. And I think we can expect and hope that government at all levels is more of that partner for people trying to get change done, not just a partner for those trying to get economic growth done.
Love that answer, Richard. Loved it. Thank you for that. What do you think social enterprises in New Zealand can learn from their peers in other countries?
So I would base this answer on, the hard places that I've worked, because I actually think it can be quite negative for social enterprises to compare with countries that are similar to them, because the actual differences then get lost. But in places that I've worked, people start with literally nothing, or actually what's around them, what they've got to work with, is being actively destroyed. And so I think one of the things that really inspired me about working in those places was just how far you can take the strengths-based approach rather than a needs or gaps analysis. Actually look at the strengths-based approach and how you build on almost nothing. And what you see and experience there is real fundamental resilience, the ability to bounce back from almost anything. And that is an amazing thing to learn from some of the places with the lowest incomes and with very few resources that we would recognize. The other thing that I think is really important when you're looking at really complex change and how long things actually take to change, if for example you can only achieve an evolutionary improvement, and even though we'd all love to transform the world tomorrow, what I've learned is the importance of patience and persistence in the entrepreneurial practice of people from harder places. They do take a more patient, calm approach to things, which allows it just allows opportunities to emerge. And I sometimes feel that in the more developed economies, we put too much premium on moving very quickly, growing very big. And then the third thing I would say is, which is part of the resilience and part of what enables you to be patient, is more of a portfolio approach to change. People spend a lot more time developing their network capital. They tend to default to a place-based approach and then look to develop networks across that place, and then a portfolio of interactions across that place. I think that sometimes, as social entrepreneurs, we treat our organization as the only game in town. And actually you can come at change from different angles. And, in some parts of the world, people do that to, make sure that they've got an income that can survive different economic shocks, for example. And their core purpose is pursued through this portfolio, not just the organization that they're running. And you can have very intelligent and very practical conversations with that kind of leader, because they are able to come at any issue from these different angles, not just the mission and business plan of their organization.
Thank you, Richard. I find it quite interesting, the statements about resilience, and very, very relevant. And that kind of leads naturally into my next question, which is, these are extraordinary times that we are living through, and many a business, whether it's a social enterprise or a small business, has been forced to pivot and change its business model very, very rapidly in an extremely fast evolving situation. What would be your advice or guidance to social enterprises in these challenging times?
So maybe just 3 points. The first is to remember and recognize that this is a public health emergency, and the key word is health. So I would lean into that. The response and the recovery that we achieve, they're very much rooted in our health and the well-being of your whānau and community. So as leaders, I think that, you know, that's a good place to start, is our own personal health, the health of our people, even before we focus on the health of the business. And then I would say, you know, to prioritize action that builds confidence, because that's what's under threat right now. You know, the tendency to be pulled into inertia or to do things which damage confidence. I think that it's difficult, but I think we've got to try and create a space where learning can happen. So I go back to that point, we're being asked to lead and learn at the same time. So you've got to create that space for learning. Make choices, create options for yourself, even if they're difficult. You know, that's practical activity. Because we don't want to get lulled into inertia and the complexity of it all, that will be very disempowering. We also don't want to just fight fires. We need to just retreat, let some things burn. It's hard to say this, but be as strategic as you can be. Carve out some space for you to think, listen to your people thinking, you know, create that learning space. Like I say, act, make choices, create options for yourself. To help with that, the third point is I would say, focus on the second bounce of your ball. I borrowed that phrase from a famous investor. Focus on where the shots you're taking are going to take you, not on where they land first. So your response has to incorporate getting yourself ready for recovery. That's what we should be focused on now. The response itself is very brutal. It's very unpredictable. There are growth opportunities in it, but we'll only realize those during the recovery. But now is a good time to experiment with them so that you're ready. I think that's a key message you'll start to hear to come out of government, is getting ourselves ready for recovery. And so, you know, getting ourselves in a fit state to start to make most productivity during the recovery, start to make most progress during the recovery.
I'm going to slip in a question there, and this is with regards to one of the points that you mentioned earlier, specifically on network capital. Now, that's not something you see many social enterprises in New Zealand doing. So it would be good to hear from you if a social enterprise was to go down that path, especially in today's times where they need to be thinking strategically. How should they go about it?
I mean, to try and remain as brief as possible, I think my approach to building network capital is a 3-stage process. You know, the quality of conversation and the diversity of the conversations that you're having, you know, focus on being in conversation, being in genuine dialogue with people first, and allow that to progress into building relationships, you know, that you can then, 3rd stage, actually do some transactions through in the future. You know, it's the relationship capital, this kind of almost organizational social capital that you're trying to build. And that starts with being open to conversation, being open to listening, engaging people in conversation. And that's not the same as advocating your cause. It's not the same as selling your organization. It's not the same as asking for money. I don't think we spend enough time making space for good quality conversation that then allows you to explore the creation of new relationships. I also think that we focus far too much on what we can get out of those relationships too soon. So, you know, it's just to pause that slightly and make sure that you've got, you know, really strong relationships, diverse relationships. I think it's quite often centralized within an organization, the networking activity, and that kind of misses the opportunity of the diversity of your team. You know, I've always encouraged organizations to support all of their members of staff to have those conversations, build those relationships, because that diversifies your capacity to build a diverse and strong network. And it's quite a leveler because you never know whose relationship you might then be able to call on, critical to the organization. And it should be easier in a place like Auckland, because, you have this culture of it feeling like a village and things like that. But, typical of other villages, it can also be quite parochial, and people like to stay within a tighter group, a tighter bubble, using the current lexicon, than they should. But, again, from my international experience, people do spend a lot more time in conversation with each other. It's valued. It's not dedicated to strategic thinking or blue sky thinking. It's dedicated to real conversation, really understanding the way people tick, what their values are, how you can align with them, allowing yourself to develop relationships, and build confidence in each other. It sounds very soft and airy-fairy, but it's fundamentally part of the resilience of social enterprise that I've seen internationally. They've always got someone to call. They've always got someone to lean into for support. They've always got early warning of things happening, because of this network capital. And they're able to, unify quickly and speak from the same hymn sheet very quickly. And I just see that as a real strength.
Talking about resilience and recovery, at this point in time, when we are on week 4 of the level 4 national lockdown, potentially opening up to level 3 soon, can you comment on what the Auckland Council is doing in terms of supporting recovery for small businesses and social enterprises?
I've not been around long enough to actually have lots of data to share. I'm also conscious that, for good reason, we're trying to communicate very clearly from the centre. So all of our, what the council says, you can guarantee has been approved and is clear. So I'm not going to say things which confuse that. I think it's worth just recognising that we are under a national state of emergency. So the central government has a lot more influence over what the council will do, what will happen for small businesses or other organisations than it would otherwise. I think I can assure people that that conversation, that discussion is starting to happen, and it's quite open at the moment to people, making sure that doesn't take a particular course. That the loudest voices aren't the only ones that are heard. So I think I think we're in a very privileged position in many ways in New Zealand, and I think that's starting to sink in 2 ways. One, you see people criticising the government and others already, and as a new person, I think, you're in quite a lucky position to be doing that because of the decisions that have been made. But I think that kind of comfort zone that we've created for ourselves means that people can be quite confident that quite a lot of creativity will be involved in the recovery and the response. And it could be quite a community effort, a collaborative effort. We won't be in the same position as some other countries, which will have a narrower set of outcomes. But I do think people should prepare themselves for something more long haul. I think a recovery effort could be up to 2 years. I think the emphasis is on getting ready for the recovery and being able to live under a more restricted life. How do we operate under the threat of an infection breaking out in your community, perhaps even in your organization? How do we actually adapt to this more restricted way of doing business and living our lives? And how do we develop almost parallel ways of operating so that we can slip more easily between levels? The levels may go up and down. They may go up and down in different parts of the country. So I think, that will have an effect on how productive we can be, because we won't be able to put all our eggs in one basket and just hope that we, can continue operating at that level. So, I think that, we have to be less hard on ourselves in terms of how productive we can be during that time.